Hello, folks. Welcome back to the program. This is Chris, live in central Pennsylvania for a special broadcast today, talking about South Africa's new gun laws. But they're not really new. If I'm not mistaken, they're amended. And we're going to have someone who knows a great deal about firearms in South Africa, Gideon Joubert, or Gideon as I say in English. We'll have him up in just a moment. But this comes in the aftermath of a unvetted Afghan national coming to this country after the disastrous debacle that Joe Biden executed in Afghanistan, letting hundreds of thousands, over 150,000, 160,000 Afghans unvetted into this country. And these are the consequences of letting people whose background has not been checked and letting people get access to firearms whose background has not been checked in America. We had two D.C. National Guardsmen, a 20-year-old female and a 24-year-old male, who were shot, and he attempted to murder them with .357 Magnum, shot the guardsman. Guardsman fell to the ground, walked up and shot the guardsman laying defenseless on the ground, and then shot the female. And then National Guard responded and within moments shot, wounded, subdued him. And we are now going through this investigation. The Joint Terrorism Task Force is investigating it as a potential act of terrorism. And we don't know what the motivation was, but at this hour, two West Virginia National Guardsmen are fighting for their life after a night of surgery in critical condition at this hour. And so that brings firearms right to the heart of the matter. Folks, I want to welcome in Gideon, hoe gaan dit?
Chris, dit gaan goed en ek hoop dit gaan goed met jou en die kykers, and it's great to be back on your channel, and thank you for actually sitting down with me to discuss a very, very important topic that is a hot button issue right now and getting it some international attention. I think myself and all the other gun owners in South Africa really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. You know, as I was about to go on air with you, I was going through my email, and I had my email from the Pennsylvania Firearms Association membership, just going through that, and they were sending us an update on Thanksgiving, talking about the history of firearms in this country. So, you know, I heard you say that, and let's see, I was listening. You said it's good to be here and with the viewers, and so I was listening to Alfred Khan. So I did pretty well. I caught I think I caught everything you said on that. So, Gideon, this is in fact not a new law; it's an amended law, correct?
Yes, this is the second attempt at amending the Firearms Control Act of 2000 with essentially the same bill. So this bill first came out in 2021. It sought to make a whole bunch of very sweeping and harmful changes to the way that firearms are regulated in South Africa. Some of the most contentious issues of the previous one is the outright banning of self-defense license categories, which means you could no longer own a gun for self-defense in South Africa, own or carry a gun for self-defense. It put immense arbitrary restrictions on the number of firearms dedicated sport shooters and dedicated hunters could own in South Africa, where at the moment there is no hard numeric limit. And more on that later. There's a bit more to it than meets the eye. They now want to impose a 6-gun limit: 2 handguns only, 2 rifles only, 2 shotguns only. That's it, which would decimate the sport shooting and hunting sectors of the firearm ownership fraternity. They wanted to make reloading your own ammunition illegal. There's a whole bunch of irrational stuff that was in that particular bill. It was grossly unpopular. At the time, I was still involved with Dear South Africa, and we facilitated, and I actually have the report open in front of me now, we facilitated at the time 97,399 unique comments, of which 96% fully and outright rejected the bill in its entirety, and another 2% rejected it, but not fully rejected it. So that gave us about 98% rejection rate. And I see that the government admitted that they received 118,000 public comments. I'm sure it is way more than that. But, you know, these are the same people who fuzzy math is a thing that runs in the family in the South African government. So the point of this is that the public rejection of the previous bill was overwhelming. There was nobody that wanted it or agreed with it. It got kicked into touch. It disappeared for a few years. And now it's reappeared in its second incarnation of the same bill with minor tweaks, but it's essentially exactly the same bill trying to do exactly the same thing. Instead of banning self-defense, for example, outright, it now wants to allow you to own a self-defense firearm, but only if you can prove extraordinary circumstances as a necessary need for it. this is in a country where, dare I say, we have whistleblowers, investigators, and liquidators that are going after government-connected fat cats and organized criminal groups. They're just in broad daylight being assassinated and murdered in their offices, in their homes, and on national freeways. And where 22% or less of the public actually trust the police, we've had rising homicide rates to world record levels. I think we're sitting on our highest homicide rate right now since 1999. And it's going up every year since 2011. We're sitting in this situation, and we're trying to make it harder for ordinary people in the state of failure where massive security vacuums exist with police, essentially make it impossible for them to own a gun for self-defense, where the citizens have to rely on themselves and on private security to keep them safe. I also would like to add that over the weekend, just after the G20, and that fiasco is a podcast in its own, the president declared gender-based violence to be a national disaster, yet at the same time his government is about to make it impossible for women to own guns to protect themselves. There's obviously more to the story, but I'm going to leave it there. And yeah.
Well, you talk about the violence, 27,000 murders a year, which is shockingly high in the United States, which is 14,000 murders in a population larger than 6 times greater than South Africa. Just to put things in perspective. And, we have over 450 million firearms, at least in this country, that are legally owned by owners. And our murder rate is far less, although people like to portray America as a very violent society. But it's not in America that every 5 minutes somebody's murdered in Shebeen or something like that. In addition to that, you talk about the danger to whistleblowers. You touched on that. Of course, we know the case of Babita Deokaran and what happened to her. And she was just doing her job. She wasn't even trying to be a whistleblower. She just reported something, and they took her out so they couldn't get prosecuted. And then, of course, poor young technician Armand Swart, who was gunned down in a hail of bullets and had nothing to do with a whistleblower case related to fraud in the Transnet, and they mistakenly murdered him, thought he was a whistleblower. It's shockingly dangerous in South Africa. And I know that Mr. Rupert lives with his windows and doors open at night, but most people can't live like that, can they?
No, they can't. And Mr. Rupert lives behind a security, shall we call it a security system, a security network that would make certain presidents blush, right? So it's not as if he's living in a normal suburban house with his doors unlocked. So I thought that was a bit of a funny comment from him. I think what makes this issue even more pressing, and everything you say is absolutely correct. South Africa has 700% the US homicide rate. We are significantly more dangerous and more violent than the US on any given day. What makes the situation worse is that the 2021 amendments didn't just originate from nowhere. It was supposed to be backed by research. And the government commissioned research in 2015 from the Wits School of Governance, which I have also open in front of me. And it was a 178-page PDF document, which studied the 15-year period from the year 2000 until 2014 to try and determine what effect the Firearms Control Act of 2000 had on crime and violence rates. And instead of following the findings and recommendations of their own commissioned research, the state is deliberately going in the opposite direction. So since we have time, if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly read you the summary findings and recommendations of this report, because it's very important, because this underpins literally everything that this fight is about. So firstly, came to the conclusion that the Firearms Control Act, the first conclusion or finding is that the Firearms Control Act is not sufficient to reduce firearm-related crime in the absence of strong policing. The level of strong and sustained policing, rather than the Firearms Control Act, is a necessary condition for reducing firearm-related crime, which comes as a surprise to absolutely nobody. Policing brings crime rates down. It's not the purpose of the law to affect criminals. The law only applies to the law-abiding, which kind of the second and third findings confirm. The second finding is that the Firearms Control Act is relevant to less than 5% of all crimes reported to the SAPS. The third finding is firearm-related crimes should be viewed as comprising firearm choice crimes versus firearm-dependent crimes. Firearm-dependent crimes are dependent on the use of firearms. And I'm just trying, it essentially say that firearm choice crimes are more responsive to policing in the presence of the Firearms Control Act, but without policing, it's not responsive at all. The next finding is that strong policing must be maintained in order to achieve sustained decline in crime. Again, doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. I'm just skipping over some of the findings, which are slightly more academic. But it also basically says that based on the demographics of the population, the demographics of firearm owners do not overlap at all with the demographics of people committing crimes. So unsurprisingly, gun owners with licenses are not criminals or not committing the crimes. And the recommendations are interesting. And this is the exact wording. We recommend the following: that the authorities need to shift their misplaced unconditional faith in the ability of the Firearms Control Act to solve crime to policing. The Firearms Control Act is not effective unless it functions under strong policing. On the policy side, there should be policies and legislation specific to addressing firearm-dependent crime, independent of firearm choice crime. They go on about saying that there needs to be more readily accessible data and that the data problem needs to be fixed. They mention that on amendments to the Firearms Control Act, we need to realize that the population of legal firearm owners is aging, and increasingly stringent conditions for firearm licensing may be viewed as restricting their human rights to security. And they also mention that with the 3D printing of firearms becoming more prolific, that the Firearms Control Act may be entirely appropriate, and that policing would once again be the effective strategy in the fight against crime. So essentially what this 178-page research paper says is to the government: listen, guys, amending this act and obsessing over this act is on the wrong track. What you need to do is focus on fixing the cops to return us to a level of strong and effective policing to address violent crime, and stop trying to write more restrictive amendments and legislation in order to really just discriminate against law-abiding gun owners, which the criminal class isn't affected by anyway. So again, if I had to say, the problem here is the state is ignoring its own research, and if I were naughty, I'd say that considering all the stuff coming out of the Madlanga Commission, where we're getting very good indications of how politically connected violent crime or these organized violent criminal groups are, you might wonder, but are politicians trying to protect their cronies in the organized criminal industry from the citizens they are trying to victimize in the first place?
Well, Gideon, you know, the government getting responses that are contrary to what it wants to do and research that doesn't match its desires is not new in South Africa. Of course, with the Expropriation Without Compensation Act, we know there were hundreds of thousands of people who protested against that by sending submissions to them, and they simply disregarded and he signed it. And it was duplicitous. You know, it was shameful, because Ramaphosa not only signed it and tried to make a big splash at Davos of all places. Oh, look at this expropriation without compensation. He'd actually signed it 34 days prior to violate the Constitution, not giving 1/3 of Parliament opportunity to have it taken immediately to the Constitutional Court for a constitutionality review, and therefore making the process much more difficult to overturn this as an unconstitutional law. So it doesn't surprise me that study is ignored. This is part and parcel of the behavior of this government and has been for over 2 decades.
No, exactly. It doesn't come as a surprise at all. What I find interesting is that they tried hiding this research from public view, and it required numerous access to information requests, PI requests from various bodies and organizations to actually get a hold of this research. I think the state, and the indication that we're getting, just to give people up to date where this thing is. So it's been resurrected. It's now in a new draft format. It hasn't been gazetted. It's still being discussed. And now for some reason, it's now being discussed at NEDLAC, which is a big forum for corporate business and labor, to discuss amendments to the Firearms Control Act for some reason. I don't know how quite that figures into the mandate. On the 4th of December in Johannesburg, South African Gun Owners Association will be there, and a whole bunch of other organizations, and we will all be there in order to oppose it. But it is now sitting there for discussion, and from the feedback that we're getting from the initial documents that we can read, is that government has taken note of the objections, but are kind of just deciding, well, objections noted, but we're carrying on anyway. So they're doing exactly the same thing, where they're ignoring the public's objections, they're ignoring the public's input, and they want to just try and push this thing through. And our task, obviously, in this is to prevent them and stop them from doing that. And if they do push it through, to fight them all the way, tie this thing up in court for decades if we can, and ultimately get it killed. But what we're doing right now, by talking about it publicly, by shining the light on how outrageous it is, this public pressure also has an impact. Because if it weren't for this type of public pressure prior to NEDLAC, we wouldn't even be at the discussion table altogether. It was public pressure that got us there. And I think it's public pressure that's going to help us push through and try and scrum this thing back into their 22-meter line.
I'm loving the rugby references that have been coming across left and right. You're talking about in touch earlier. Now that's scrum and the 22. I love it. So, my following of South African firearm. Well, before I get to, I'm going to get to, but let me just do kind of a sarcastic comment, get your feedback. I mean, gun control and disarming citizens has worked so well in the United Kingdom and Australia and New Zealand, where no murders occur, nobody's killed with a gun, there's no crime, and citizens are just safe because police are ubiquitous and protect them every day, everywhere. I mean, it's gone really well in those places, hasn't it?
Well, absolutely. The UK is a great example of what happens if you allow this sort of thing to take hold and carry on unopposed. Now we're sitting with situations where they're looking for the same solution for knife crime. They're looking for the same solution for acid attacks, none of which involves actually addressing the problems, the people causing the problems and cracking down on criminals and criminal groups. It's actually saying, okay, we need to bring out legislation where if you want to buy a carving knife for your kitchen, you need to have ID. Mm-hmm. Or a letter from your guardian, or a blood test.
This is like Sadiq Khan in the UK, no knives in London.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to buy pool acid for your swimming pool, if you have a swimming pool in the UK, I don't know if the weather allows you to have one, you probably need also some sort of license requirement to be allowed to do that. So what they're trying to do is regulating behavior through legislation. And they're trying to regulate the behavior through regulating objects, where someone made a very good point and say, we could actually, if you wanted to follow the US model, you could abolish gun control legislation in South Africa altogether, cancel it. And what you do is you start punishing crimes committed by use of firearms. So if you commit a murder by use of a firearm, that is an aggravating circumstance. If you commit a robbery by use of a firearm, that's a significantly aggravating circumstance, automatically doubling your sentence or something similar to that, or harsher penalties. If you're negligent with a firearm, that's an aggravating circumstance, and so on and so forth. So you start directly addressing the misbehavior without trying to regulate the possession of objects. What people forget is that South Africa has an estimated, call it 3 million licensed firearms in legal possession. And we have anywhere between 2.5 to 6 million unregistered firearms in illicit possession, meaning that the Firearms Control Act of 2000 only applies to, at best, about 50% of all guns in circulation in SA right now. We have had these credible reports from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime that we have an entire sort of syndicate of corrupt Namibian policemen that are shipping Namibian police service pistols, Uzis, and AK-47s directly to Cape Flats gangs across the border. There's a whole cartel of them that make money by supplying our criminals with firearms originating in Namibia. We probably have similar cross-border flows from Lesotho, if you look at what the Zamas are carrying, and probably through Mozambique and Zim as well. So we have cross-border flows from the rest of the continent, which is full of guns in here. We have the state itself being unable, I think, if I recall the last report that Jenny Irish, I forgot the second double barrel of her surname, issued before her untimely death at the at GTOC, that there was about 2.2 million firearms in state ownership, of which most of them the government had no idea where they are and whose possession they were, what condition they were in. So you have the state itself that is a terrible, awful, negligent, criminally negligent custodian of its own guns. You have these cross-border flows of guns coming in. You have corrupt government officials selling guns directly to criminal groups. And where the obsession now lies is that we need to write additionally stringent regulation to essentially curb stomp legal gun owners into the ground and leave them and all of society completely defenseless against this army of government armed criminals, essentially.
Well, in fact, a couple things here. Tell your kids to quit playing Grand Theft Auto. They're eating up all your bandwidth. You're pixelated now, so your voice is coming through, but you're pixelated. And
am I very badly pixelated, Chris?
What's that?
Am I very badly pixelated?
Oh, very much so. You look like Max Headroom from the 1980s, if you know what that is. It's
I will try to fix that without ditching the stream.
Yeah, we might have to go that. But speaking of the state and its criminally negligent activity, the things they admit are always hilarious. Because they admit them and they don't realize how stupid they are about telling people the truth, and then they try to cover it up. But it wasn't 5 years ago. I think that what happened was that the state admitted that they didn't have any idea where 25,000. There it is. You're better. Didn't have 25 knowledge of where 25,000 service sidearms were for the SAPs. They couldn't locate them. And we also have many credible cases of police leasing out or renting their firearms for the commission of crimes on the weekends and things like that. It's pretty frightening, the irresponsibility of the government. And gosh, I don't even want to think about R4s and the South African National Defense Force, and if they even have accountability for those weapons. I would not be shocked to find those things have found their way outside of armories in South Africa. The policy control by the state is comical. They want to take away private citizens' guns who are responsible firearm owners, who lock them up in gun safes and use them responsibly, yet they have no control over many of their own firearms. It's pretty shocking.
Well, this is the thing, and that's the big glaring hypocrisy. So we are living in the state of out of control violent crime we're presently in due to the failure of the state. And not just the failure of the state, in many cases, the complicit activities and acts of the agents of the state that are acting 100% contrary to their oaths of office and are just being outright vicious criminals. And the response to this is not to turn the attention inwards and try and fix that and fix policing. It is to turn it outwards in an almost type of Marxist paranoia and saying, well, you see, all these people that privately own guns, the security companies and the private citizens, they're the problem, and we need to address them because they're somehow a source. That has been thoroughly debunked numerous times. The other side of the problem, to me, that dovetails rather nicely with this, is we keep having the same conversation over and over without addressing the root cause. Is that a tyrannical government does not want an armed citizenry. It is absolutely paranoid of it. And there's this bizarre idea that somehow 3 million people with 9mm pistols and hunting rifles and the odd guy with a semi-auto rifle is going to somehow be able to band together and overthrow the government. I'm sorry, guys, we have whole armies of foreign nationals digging up all the old mines underneath the old East Rand, which is essentially causing the houses there to collapse into their own floors. Armies of these guys denying whole swathes of territory to the authorities, armed with everything up to including belt-fed machine guns, and you're worried about the most law-abiding segment of society. That tells you that this is not really about crime prevention or violence prevention. It's purely about paranoia. There was a second point I wanted to make right off the back of that, and probably due to my pixelated screen, it completely evaporated, but it's going to come back to me in a moment.
Well, Gideon, you say it's about paranoia, no doubt about that. But this is what communists do. The Soviets disarmed their citizens and then they slaughtered them, put them in concentration camps, in the gulags and things like that, and just went after the poorest of the poor in Ukraine, and millions died as a consequence of it. The Chinese communists disarmed their citizens after they've all fought to defeat the Japanese, then fought each other in a civil war. The list goes on and on. But what's interesting to me here about all of this is that the South African government wants to do this, and you say is about paranoia, and it may very well be about that. But to me, I'm also looking at it from a different angle. The South African government, with no justifiable basis, disbanded the commandos almost 20 years ago now, on the argument that, well, this is, a relic of apartheid, when actually the commandos predates apartheid by hundreds of years, and it was a self-defense system, much like the Minuteman system was in New England in the United States before we became a country. Is you grab your musket, your powder, your ball, your rod, and your attack, and you hop on your horse, and you join up, and you defend your homeland against threats. And that's what it was. But the commandos had evolved into a law enforcement organization as well, even though they were reservists. They disbanded that, and rural crime has skyrocketed as a consequence, particularly farm attacks. And so that, and then I also see from my perspective that this is paranoia on the part, I agree with the paranoia on the part of ANC leadership, who are terrified of white South Africans in particular, assuming that white South Africans all support things like the AWB and what they were trying to do at the end of the apartheid era in Bophuthatswana. I mean, look at the Boermog. There were more government agents in the Boermog than were Boermog members. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's, they created a situation in which people were stupid enough to try to act foolishly against the law, and they got punished for it. Now, I mean, to me, it's also this terror, this horrible fear of white people that senior ANC leaders have. I'm going to come out and say it. I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me. Their actions, they deny what's going on in the country. And to me, the disbandment of the commandos was to make whites unsafe because they were afraid of the commandos, even though the 4 newest regiments were entirely black and Zulu based in KZN. But to me, it's more than just paranoia. I think it's also their fear of white people, which is, in my view, unfounded. If white people were going to do something to the ANC, they would have done a long time ago.
Well, that's exactly it. It's an entirely unfounded fear because it's just not possible. I think someone asked me on another stream months ago about, is the ANC afraid of a coup d'etat? And I'd say, well, if they are afraid of a coup d'etat, then they have to be bloody worried about their own military and the rogue generals they have sitting in there that seem to be pursuing all sorts of personal agendas, as well as what's going on in KZN at the moment. But to be brutally honest, who the heck wants to overthrow this government and try to run this place? I mean, what a nightmare. But that may be a legitimate fear. The other thing, that if you zoom out a bit and you look at the bigger picture of everything else going on just outside of foreign legislation, there's a very strong push, according to the National Democratic Revolution lines, to centralize state control over every aspect of human existence in this country. And that's from business, education, the economy, and all aspects of the economy, education, both private and public, what you're allowed to own, where you're allowed to go. It is this obsession with everything must be centralized and directly controlled by the states. That's why that's why you have expropriation without compensation, that the state must be the final custodian of all private property. That's why I have national health insurance, because the state must be the final and ultimate custodian of all healthcare in South Africa. That's why you have these increasingly aggressive bills in the business sector regarding regulating job reservations based on race and all sorts of other nonsense, that everything from water licensing to business licensing, which is now the new one, that the state has the final say in whether or not you're allowed to trade and make money, and if you're the right color in order to do it. It is a very socialist, Marxist thing that is typical of the ANC's mentality, where it is very much stuck in the Cold War. And I think this is where a lot of left liberal white commentators miss the bus completely, is they're trying to rationalize what they're seeing through this modern left lib lens, and it's not. We are dealing with an animal that is 50 to 60 years stuck in the past, and that is behaving as a Marxist post-colonial liberation organization behaved back then, but it has a lot of inconvenient constraints on its power. Funnily enough, one of them still being the Constitution. Not that that document means much in this day and age, but it still is acting somewhat as a constraint. And that's unfortunately the mentality we're dealing with. And private firearm ownership does not sit across the same campfire as that specific mentality.
Hey folks, good day. You're listening to the Indaba conversation with Gideon Joubert from the Gun Owners Association of South Africa, if I got that correct, and also known as Paratus. I've got a link to paratus.info. You can learn about firearms in South Africa. We're discussing the South African Amended Firearms Act and its impacts and some of the things going on. Gideon, I wanted to go back to something I was going to talk about earlier, but I want you to finish that portion. And that is my experience with following firearms legislation in South Africa. Is I remember in the early years, right after the turn of the millennium, they did a number of things. They were trying to pass an anti-mercenary law, which said that if you were a member of the liberation movement, there's no problem. But if you work for Doctors Without Borders, you could be prosecuted for being a mercenary. It's just ridiculous. But at the same time, they did amend the Firearms Act, if I remember correctly. And what they did is you required to go register your firearms at the police station. But then they promptly provided no forms for people in most police stations, by default making firearm owners who are lawful owners illegal and criminals just because they didn't provide the forms. I mean, is that an accurate depiction of what happened about 20 years ago?
There was a lot, jeepers. That was a little bit before my time, but I recall that there were so many issues with the Firearms Control Act of 2000's implementation that even though it was signed into law in 2000, it was only implemented around about June, July 2004, 4.5 years later. And even then, it took about 5 years for it to be properly implemented. And because of all those issues and all those challenges, some of which was probably due to extreme incompetence and inability, and others probably on a part of a bit of malice on the part of the state, whole bunch of court cases. That's why you still have people sitting with green license cards today from the old previous Arms and Ammunition Act that never, ever converted their licenses onto the new system, and that those licenses remain valid essentially indefinitely, precisely because of all that sort of tomfoolery. So the one blessing that we do have in South Africa is we love writing and passing extremely repressive, irrational, and just outright evil laws. And I do see this as an evil law, because any law that seeks to disarm good people in the face of this criminal onslaught, and where a president can go on international television and say gender-based violence is a national disaster, while on the one side, while on the other side his hand is busy getting ready, warming up to sign a piece of draft legislation that would take the ability for those women most at risk to own guns to defend themselves away from them. That is an evil act. In spite of all of that, we are terrible at implementing these things. And that's not a virtue, because an incompetent foe is still not a good one. But I'd rather have an incompetent foe that keeps making these types of mistakes, and that you can take on and you can fight them on numerous fields and push them back, rather than one that is cynical, very effective at what they're doing, and you start sitting with a situation like you have in the United Kingdom, that you have in Canada, that you have in Australia, to a lesser extent New Zealand, who seem to be getting their brains back at the moment. But I would prefer to fight, to let's go back to a rugby analogy. I prefer to play this team than one of the overseas ones.
Well, that'll work. We'll play the C team instead of the A team, or the top 15. You know, there's a big difference between the United States and what I've observed in South Africa. In America, our jurisprudence, you have the presumption of innocence. And if someone enters your home and you shoot them, the presumption is you're innocent, pending an investigation to prove otherwise. And the state must prove your guilt. However, in South Africa, I see repeatedly when someone defends themselves, even in their own home, and they shoot someone, they're charged with a criminal act, and then basically it has to be unproved that they didn't commit acts. So if someone breaks your home in KZN and you're getting, or you walk in your home and a family member is being tortured or raped, and you fire a firearm and kill someone, they're getting charged with homicide. I mean, from the get-go, I don't understand that. It seems like there's a presumption of guilt in South Africa, which is completely backwards from my mindset.
So we do actually operate under the presumption of innocence. What the problem that we have is we have a huge issue with regards to how the police officers here understand and implement the law. And it's a dying breed of old school, very professional police officer that went to police college and academy back in the day, when they were thoroughly instructed and trained and received a high quality of education. They still went and did their bachelor's in policing, and some of them did more advanced degrees in policing, and they understood the law thoroughly. They understood how the Criminal Procedures Act should be applied, and they understood that they're there to serve the public. Those guys are worth their weight in gold, and there are fewer and fewer of them every year. As more of them exit the police to enter the private sector, more of them take early retirement because it's such a dysfunctional place to work. And you're sitting with the police service now that is ejecting all its good quality human capital, which means that the new human capital that's coming in is not being trained to the same level, is not receiving the on-the-job training and experience to the same level. And then you end up with stuff like this, where the policeman's view is, oh, there's been a shooting, I don't know who's guilty or innocent, I'm not going to bother doing basic police work on the scene. And even though arresting someone and charging them is a last resort, you only arrest somebody to secure their appearance in court. If this guy's got a fixed job, fixed address, fixed family, what purpose is there to arresting them versus just giving them a warning statement? It's like that understanding doesn't exist, and you're immediately deprived of your freedom. You need to get bail, and then there's a court case that runs, in which tends to be thrown out eventually, or you're acquitted or found not guilty, but it's at the cost, at your cost, not the state's. And this level of incompetence ultimately costs us all. And you also have to then wonder, there is certainly a certain level of malice in some police officers and how they approach certain scenes. My own interaction with them in the wake of my own defensive shooting was extremely positive. I got a very positive policeman. There was no racial issue made of it altogether, and we were of separate races, or however you'd categorize it. And unfortunately, he's not in the service anymore because he felt compelled to leave because of how dysfunctional it was.
No, I understand that. So there's a comment in the chat from ABH Many, who said that not true what I said. No, please listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's an appearance of a presumption of guilt because a murder case is open, which is what you said, a murder case gets open. To me, that prejudices the situation. And that's the first point. The second point you've touched on, which I didn't get to in my comment that I'll come to now, is that now you have to waste your personal resources, your time, your money defending yourself. That's ludicrous. That's ludicrous. There must be an investigation that proves that there's a basis for charging with a crime before a case is open in that respect. To me, it doesn't make any sense. It's just it's wrong. It's in my view, it's an abuse of the state. The state is coming after a person who defended themselves legitimately in self-defense. We have the castle doctrine in America, and it is an issue in some states where it's abused because the leftists go after people who defend themselves inside their homes. But the castle doctrine is critically important because you should be safe in your home and hearth. Someone who enters your home without your permission in the dark of night didn't come there to put presents under the tree. They're not Santa Claus. Looks like you got people photobombing in the background there.
Yeah, no, my little guy's photobombing me a bit, but 1 second. Let me just get the door closed. There we go. So there is definitely let me just take back to my own experience, right? So I was never arrested. I was never charged. Then I dealt with an extremely, the docket circulated amongst the National Prosecuting Authority for about 3 years, and it ended in a nollie prosecute, was a do not prosecute. But the junior prosecutor who was dealing with it wanted to actually prosecute me for murder until his senior overrode him and said, "Excuse me, how are you going to prove this?" 1 second, Chris. Let me just let me just do this.
Not a problem. Take care of that. So you didn't hear what I said. You heard what you wanted to hear, and I just explained it. And again, once a murder case is open, you've tainted the information. So what does the press say? Armand Dutoy was a murder case is open. Armand Dutoy in a shooting where he shot an intruder. It's not a good appearance. It gives a presumption on the outside of people viewing this, especially in the days of social media and the corrupt media that we have. People will presume the person did something wrong, and it's just in my view wrong.
Well, and it's never followed up on. It's very seldom followed up on that you actually hear what the outcome of a lot of these cases is. And it also acts as a huge inhibitor. People who own guns and carry them for self-defense, carry them as a last resort. Now I've got all these media stories circulating about, well, if you use it in self-defense, you're going to get arrested and charged and end up in prison and spend millions of rands on legal fees. That's not always the case. That's not always true. That is the truth in perhaps the worst case scenario. I'm yet to hear of a single person that is sitting in prison after legitimately defending themselves. I know of people that got convicted, and in most cases they were house arrest, not because they legitimately shot somebody, but because of their fear of going to prison. They interfered with the crime scene. The police officer was smart enough to pick up on it because they're not all of them are stupid. Some of them are extremely bright. And the guy got charged not with murder, ultimately convicted for it, but with defeating the ends of justice. So that's always my advice to people. It's like, listen, I know that you're terrified in the wake of this thing. There's some basic advice you can follow. And Masada Ayub has a great YouTube video on how to handle the police after a defensive shooting. And it's applicable to South Africa as well. So do go watch that. But ultimately, don't do stupid stuff like interfere with the crime scene and get yourself into far more trouble, because the chances of that being picked up is pretty much high.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's not wise. If it's kind of like when a law enforcement officer approaches you in a motor vehicle. You remain calm. You follow the instructions. You do what the officer says. Don't tamper with a crime scene. Don't tamper with a scene in which you've defended yourself, because then you give the impression you've done something wrong. If you've done nothing wrong, go through. But again, I come back to this point because ABH Men is coming back with this story and saying that the name is seldom published. Well, perhaps where you worked at as a precinct captain or as a district commander or something like that, that may be true. But I can sit here and run through countless cases in the media where we got the name of people the day the story comes out, an attack occurs, particularly rural shootings is what I'm talking about. And this happens not in residential areas, but whenever it's a farm-related thing, because the media want to run with this white genocide narrative they want to perpetuate, that they fabricated, that they throw on people in the center and the center right. And so every time a farm attack comes up, almost without fail, if a firearm is involved, someone defend themselves, their name is mentioned in the paper and a murder inquiry is underway. And that prejudices the situation. And almost, as Gideon said, almost never do they come back. It's like Graham Smith. Graham Smith is a racist. Graham Smith is a racist. Graham Smith is a racist. For 4 years, his name was tarnished and ripped through the press. Those hundreds of thousands of news articles that were published about him are now in the record. When someone researches South African cricket 40 years from now, who, like Gideon, wasn't around 25 years ago when I was following these events, he had to recount them. I recall them. Someone's going to research this 4 years and say, well, this Graham Smith character was a hell of a racist. No, he wasn't. A panel of an Indian black judge found him completely innocent of the charges, and he was defamed. And this is what I'm getting at. That's the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Many. Stick with me on this. That's the point. And it does happen far too often. I don't live in South Africa, and I can go over case after case after case. This happens, and to me, it's just wrong. It shouldn't be done that way.
Well, that's actually a good point with regards to media narrative. I think we just touched on it, the fact that it is a demoralizing thing to deal with, where you're creating a perception which is inaccurate, that should you act in your own private defense or in the private defense of any other person you feel responsible for, that you're going to face punishing and awful consequences. And yes, that is a thing you have to bear in mind, and it's something that you have to be prepared for, but it is not a guarantee, and that's not quite how, fortunately yet, how the system works in South Africa. But that said, caveat, there are some horror stories out there of particular precincts in particular parts of the country staffed by particular police officers and station commanders where they have acted extremely maliciously and negligently towards members of the public. And unfortunately, the part that makes that relevant is that there is hardly ever any accountability or consequences for those actions by the police. They are eventually taken to court and sued, and the aggrieved or the victimized person does get usually some form of compensation. But again, they have to go to the effort and the cost of dragging the state to court in order to be compensated for the harm that was done to them. We do have a problem, again, with a deprofessionalization of the South African police service. And if you look carefully at certain key functions of it, visible policing is visibly deteriorating. My police station in Rondebosch, great police station, fantastic police station commander, fantastic DFO, fantastic head of detectives, just great high-quality people. But I think there's about 40 or 50 police officers at that station, where they should have a complement of 70, right? So they're horrifically understaffed. Whereas right next door, the president's big residence is sitting with, and I have it on good authority, about 300 policemen. That is guarding the empty house where he doesn't live. And you have these types of disparities. It's therefore no surprise of you hearing stories of good, professional, experienced policemen throwing in the towel and leaving the service. And unfortunately, the quality of the replacements are variable. So you have visible policing declining. Detectives, if you sit with a detective that has 300 dockets on his desk, that means that if he just does a 5-minute annotation per docket once a week, it takes him 8 to 9 hours, a full working day, just to get through that. He's already lost a day's worth of work just making notes and annotation to a docket. So your detective service is on severe decline. Cybercrime policing doesn't exist. You have cybercrime detectives that don't have an internet connection, a cell phone, or a computer. So I don't know how they're supposed to investigate cybercrime. I don't know if they're supposed to go to the nearest medium in the trailer next door and ask her to do a card or a palm reading. Then you've got a crime intelligence gathering, which is so politically infiltrated, factionalized, messy, just grim. And then you hear the other stories about the SAPS's crime intelligence gathering allegedly not sharing information with the state security agency and vice versa because there's factional infighting. So you have this hugely dysfunctional machine, which is not conducive to creating a professional environment serving the public. So it comes as no surprise whatsoever that you have people in uniforms either being disinterested, demoralized, or outright abusive, and others just behaving like complete criminals. So this brings us back to the origin of this discussion about firearm amendments. Unless we fix policing, none of this other stuff matters. And it will leave ordinary people disarmed, those who choose to comply, because let's be honest, if your policing is this broken, what are they actually going to do if 2 million people just decide quietly to be civilly disobedient? What is going to be their answer to that? It's a big thorny issue with a lot of moving parts and constitutional angles and all sorts of stuff. And it all comes down to the fact that if the police actually did what they were supposed to do, there would be no motivation from a crime fighting point of view for any legislative amendments at all.
100%. And no, it's not the police that are releasing the names. It's the media, as I said. The names appear in the media. So that when it comes to those people who have an inquiry open on them. But, I mean, we've seen this movie, Gideon. I've watched this movie unfold right in front of my eyes. And sadly, I predicted this on June 29th, 2021. I said there was going to be riots and all kinds of chaos in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, I thought it was going to happen in Nicklin, but in fact, it happened. It started at the Mui River at the toll plaza, where 100 trucks were torched that night on the 4th of July, 2021, when Zuma failed to turn himself into the escort facility. And, of course, in contempt of court, we see that Sanzo Mkuno and Bekachile, the cat in the hat there, they also failed to obey the court's order because they were supposed to secure him in there, and they didn't do it by the date they were told to do it. He finally showed up after midnight on the next day at the escort. But we've seen this movie. I mean, when tens of thousands of people take the law into their own hands and just revolt, the police had no ammunition, they had no coordination, they had no plans. And as far as coordinating, and he said the rumors of crime intelligence not sharing with the state security, well, it's not a rumor, it's a fact. We know that this is what happened, this internal insurrection in July 2021 within the ANC that unfolded in KZN and in Soweto, and led to billions of rand, billions of dollars of damage, business reputational harm, and KwaZulu-Natal is still recovering from this. Not to mention the 2 floods they've had. It's just a mess. But we've seen the movie, and it's not pretty. At least 354 people openly acknowledged by the government were murdered or killed during this, and the number is far higher than that. It's probably 3,000, we believe, based on some anecdotal information we've seen. And citizens had to defend themselves. I mean, it was like Escape from New York, Snake Plissken. That's what was going on. We have seen this movie before, and it's not pretty. And this state of South Africa is incapable of dealing with that. Imagine, as you say, if a couple million people decide just to simply ignore the law.
Well, I love the fact that you brought up Escape from New York, because it's probably my favorite Kubrick. Not Kubrick. He also made The Thing. Now I've really butchered it, and everyone in the comments is going to come after me. John Carpenter. It's my favorite John Carpenter film, and man, Kurt Russell is the man. But that's exactly what happened. It was complete chaos, where people were left to their own devices, where they didn't see a police car for the better part of 7 days. And in the wake of all of this, in that living, live demonstration of state failure, that one can still have even conversations like these one, where the madness of that, the failure of that, it hasn't even been addressed yet. I'm pretty sure there are some burnt out husks of warehouses and factories and retail shops in KZN right now. They've never been repaired. That just live as skeletons and reminders of what happened in July 2021, a mere 4 years ago. And yet another example of state failure, another example of the authorities not being able to keep a handle on it, and another example just showing how vulnerable the citizenry are to these sorts of chaotic events, yet also how resilient they are so long as they have access to the necessary equipment, knowledge, training, skills, all this sort of stuff. All of those things obviously being under direct threat from an amendment bill like this one.
All right, so let's shift our focus a little bit, Gideon, so what next? I mean, what happens now? I mean, Dear SA, I don't want to say bad or good things about it, but it's kind of not what it once was, and they were an actor that played a role in getting those comments put in. Is there a comment period here? Is there something citizens can do to stop this runaway freight train? I mean, Ramaphosa clearly doesn't care. I mean, the guy walks around and mocks President Trump, and then he wonders why he's going to get blocked from next year's Miami summit. But I mean, what can citizens do now? I mean, other than awareness. I mean, this I don't think a lot of people even know that this thing has been amended or being amended, and it's going to go before Ramaphosa's desk for another signature, like Bella, like EWC, like NHI, like the black tax, all these outrageous pieces of legislation that take away the freedom. I mean, these people think that their purpose is to restrain freedom. They're supposed to ensure freedom. But what can citizens do going forward?
I think what citizens can do going forward is we do not actually have a timeline on this thing. It could still take many years depending upon the process it needs to run. We're under the impression that it needs to go back to the police, the Portfolio Committee on Police, where Ian Cameron is sitting and waiting for this thing. We do not know if these agents of managed decline in the South African government are going to try and bypass him and try and get it through some other channel. The fact is it hasn't even been gazetted yet. So what citizens can do right now is join any firearm rights organization. Obviously, I'm with the South African Gun Owners Association, SAGA, the green one. So feel free to join us. We are at the tip of the spear in this fight alongside all the other organizations. Everyone is pulling together really nicely in fighting and opposing and objecting to this. I know that Stephen Palos from CHASA, so if you're a member of the Confederated Hunters Association of South Africa, they are good people, and all their hunting associations are on side with this, as are the wing shooters, as are everybody else. So what you can do is join an association, even if you're not a gun owner, come help us fight this. Write to your associations especially if they're sport shooting associations, to give them your support, as well as your demanding that they oppose this. They are opposing it. And I think it's also time where, if you feel like it, Ian Cameron's parliamentary email is freely available on Parliament's website. Also blow up his inbox, because the more mails about this he gets, the more input he gets to support his side of the argument. So, Ian, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I might be giving you a bad time right now, but blow up Ian Cameron's parliamentary inbox with messages decrying this, opposing it, and giving him your full support in the fight against this bill. And keep an eye on it. We will, Chris, people like you are vital in keeping the public informed to make sure that people know where this thing is and every next step. For now, the next step is we're going to NEDLAC on the 4th of December to essentially tell them what our counter proposal is. And our counter proposal is this: that we insist and demand in the strictest possible terms that the government adheres to the findings and recommendations of its own commissioned research. That's basically it. So just keep an eye on this channel, keep an eye on everybody else, and please join a gun rights organization.
Well, I have to say that I'm perfectly fine with people spamming Ian Cameron's inbox. He owes me an interview. I haven't heard from him now that he's a bigwig in the DA. He's scarce. So you can go ahead and spam his inbox and remind him.
If it makes you feel better, Chris, I'm a friend of his, and I struggle to get a hold of him because he's that busy. So yeah, don't feel left out in the cold.
No, I know that's his call. That's why I'm joking about it. He's very busy, but yeah. So in America, Gideon, we have organizations that provide insurance for lawful gun owners. If you're a member of the organization, because a lot of jurisdictions, so-called blue states, although there's no such thing as a blue and red state, that's just a misnomer. It just means it's one state tends to vote in one direction, but it could be 51-49 all the time, not 70-30. But there are some 70-30 places, like the high mountain states. But the point here is that a lot of these organizations have insurance, so that if you're charged with a crime in defending yourself, that they have attorneys that will help defend you. I don't know if anybody has anything like South Africa that can help them, but it's worthwhile for people to join those organizations as long as you're a responsible adult who's using firearms appropriately and you're charged, accused of a crime and charged. We have mechanisms that can help protect those gun owners, because it's just evil how some of these organizations will try to demonize people who've defended themselves because of their misunderstanding. What gets me, Gideon, about this is that, of course, I grew up with firearms. I mean, I was shooting firearms already before I got to double digits in age, and learned that they're dangerous. Much like an automobile is a dangerous weapon, you have to be careful how you use it and be cognizant of what you're doing. But what gets me is that I remember going to basic training with this guy in my platoon. And he was in tears when we went to the range, in tears. I mean, we're shooting at targets 300 meters away, and I'm like, what upset? I've never had a gun before. I'm like, okay, calm down. It's going to be okay. But to me, it seems to be an irrational fear of firearms. And these people say guns kill people. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. They use tools. They use acid. They use automobiles. They use knives. They use firearms. It's just a tool. And to me, it's very valuable to have organizations that provide insurance for responsible folks. Do you have something similar in South Africa, a way to insure people for litigation?
There is, in fact, a product. I think there's only one, and it's called Firearms Guardian. And I know that Ian was very intimately involved with it in its founding. I don't know if he still is, but as far as I can tell, and from the feedback I've gotten from people, it's a good product, and it's worked well for the people that have needed to rely on it so far, and that it is very it's underwritten by a legitimate, bona fide, large insurance company, so you are getting value for at least what you pay for there. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I'll research that, and I'll try to stick that into the description here for the program. I've put SAG in there as well. I already have Paratus.info, so people can find those links if they want to go check it out. So before we wrap up, I want to thank you, Gideon, for coming on, and also kind of a coup. I think I'm the first person, as you said, to reach out to you on this topic, which is very timely, and I'm sure lots of people are going to be asking for you to come on because none of us can get a hold of Ian Cameron. So, just kidding. No, but I want to thank you for coming on. And as I always do with my guests, I give them a chance to have the floor at the end. Is there anything you want to share with folks about this issue, and any concerns or any advice you want to offer them? The floor is yours.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is fight this thing tooth and nail. It is vitally important. And I think there will come a point where we need to go on the offensive about getting some proper right to keep and bear arms in this country. I think the time will be right and ripe to do it. So first things first is deal with this bunch of delinquent, awful legislation, or proposed amendment legislation, and then go on the offensive and actually push for meaningful, positive, real change, because that's really what's necessary. I will be doing a bunch more interviews on this. I've got SAFM tonight at 20 to 11 this evening. I've got the Center for Risk Analysis next week, Monday, and then I do think I've got the Truth Report as well waiting for me on Wednesday. So it is becoming a hot issue, and I think if everyone can just share this video, share all the other interviews, all the other bits and pieces written about it, and just keep making noise and piling the public pressure, that is the bit that you can do for now as well, and that's vitally important.
Well, that's fantastic advice. Thanks a lot for that, Gideon Joubert. I appreciate you coming on the program, as I said, and thank you for sharing all that stuff with us. It's a complicated issue, but I would say complicated because government makes it complicated. It's pretty simple and straightforward. To be a responsible firearm owner, train your kids, teach them respect it, and keep the thing pointed down range, keep it unsafe, that sort of thing. And it's not a toy. I think that's an important thing. This isn't Grand Theft Auto, which a lot of people seem to think they got their get. But firearms are a very useful tool for hunting, for sportsmanship, for self-defense, and well, for lots of other valid reasons. Thanks for coming on, and we'll chat with you again, and I wish you the very best.
Thank you, Chris, to you and the viewers as well, and we'll chat very soon.
All right, folks, I'll let him drop off. That's Gideon Joubert, Paratus, as you may know him better. We were just chatting before he came on air. The last time we, I think, saw each other in person was at Century City. I think that's where it was, by the coffee shop, the Indian place there. So I'm going to wrap it up here. You're going to be directed immediately to the news broadcast, which is coming up in just a moment. So hang around. We'll be right back with the news. And then after that, don't forget, it is Thanksgiving here. It's a federal holiday in America. But I will be on Vena du Toy's channel for Bosbarat, which comes up after my news. You'll be redirected from here to my news, and from the news to Vena. See, I keep them busy. All right, folks, that's going to do it from here. Y'all take care, and I'll be right back with the news.